Well, thank you very much, Odette. I'll choose to speak in English, although the speech would be much shorter if I spoke in Hebrew. Odette is, when I came to Congress in 1982, even before I was sworn in, Odette, who was then the congressional liaison from the Israeli embassy, started a significant investment of his time and energy in taking somebody with a natural inclination regarding the special relationship, and I have said in the past that I was actually a Zionist before I was a Democrat, but a substantial investment of his time and energy in educating me. I hope 26 years later he does not think he invested in a Ponzi scheme here. Every new president brings changes to the U.S. foreign policy. But what is really more remarkable, I mean, Itamar described some of these kinds of changes, but in some ways what's more remarkable is the essential continuity of U.S. goals and interests across administrations, and especially with regard to the Middle East. So it probably won't surprise you that I believe we're going to see considerable continuity of U.S. Middle East policies under the Obama administration, foremost among these, the unshakable U.S. support for Israel and its security. And I'm not a member of the Obama transition team. I can't pretend to speak in any way for the president-elect. They themselves are demonstrating the same discipline that he showed during his campaign in the context of this transition in terms of delving publicly into different policy issues. But I make a prediction. Senator has come to the same conclusion that President Obama is going to be, and this administration will be just as strong in its support of Israel, and as those of the recent past. And why do I say that? I don't want to sound like I'm just one more op-ed piece during the campaign on behalf of President Obama in the Jerusalem Post or the Haaretz, but he has a strong, if short, record as a U.S. Senator. He has made strong statements in support of Israel, both during the campaign and after he was elected. He has appointed a strongly pro-Israel Secretary of State in Hillary Clinton, and the same can be said about his Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel. Very importantly, and for me, it's quite unprecedented. Maybe it's a consequence of my position, but I'm hearing enough to think it is much more systemic than that. We have a U.S. Congress that remains firmly supportive of Israel and the special relationship with the United States, and we're seeing a new president that is particularly interested in staying close to and attuned to congressional thinking, both in the context of the transition team and in terms of his own personal efforts at what has to be an incredibly hectic time on a bipartisan basis to reach out quietly to members of Congress in both parties by the president-elect individually. I don't think this is an administration that wants to start out by getting out of step with congressional Democrats regarding Israel. While I would anticipate differences in emphasis and approach from the Bush administration, I feel quite comfortable that the Obama administration will not reflexively adopt the Bush administration's mantra of 8 years ago, which was, if the previous administration did it, we will change it. A few thoughts regarding what U.S. policy will and should look like. The principal threats to U.S. interests, and consequently the Obama administration's goals, will likely remain constant. A recent report by the Brookings Institution's Managing Global Insecurity Project summarized it this way: the 21st century will be defined by security threats unconstrained by borders, from climate change, nuclear proliferation, and terrorism to conflict, poverty, disease, and economic instability. I want to focus on two of the more immediate challenges, the proliferation of terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda have the ambition to conduct mass terror, but so far not the means. Iran, however, the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world today, may soon have both. Pakistan has at least 4 major terrorist groups operating within its borders, 3 different power centers, and a full nuclear weapons arsenal. A recent report of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission stated that if one were to map the geography of terrorism and WMD, all paths would lead to Pakistan. North Korea remains a serious concern, even if it has faded a bit from the spotlight as the six-party process has moved forward. Even during the six-party talks, North Korea apparently did not hesitate to jumpstart a nuclear weapons program in Syria. If those talks break down, and perhaps even if they don't, who can feel comfortable that North Korea would not willingly supply nuclear material and weapons technology to whomever will pay? I'm encouraged by President-elect Obama's commitment to look at regional approaches and multilateral solutions to these issues. I'm very encouraged that he clearly understands the need for the United States to resuscitate its leadership role in global nuclear nonproliferation and arms control policies. And at the same time, I am convinced that President-elect Obama fully understands the strategic challenge that Iran presents to the international community, as well as the unique nature of the threat it poses for Israel. The war in Afghanistan, the problems in Pakistan are a good illustration of the interconnectedness of foreign policy and the need for a more regional rather than nation-by-nation approach. Our Pakistan policy can't be considered in isolation from our Afghanistan policy or our India policy, for that matter. We have to find new ways to address the instability on both sides of a largely theoretical Afghan-Pakistan border. It's time for Islamabad's rulers to realize that homegrown and supported terrorist groups are as much a danger to themselves as they are to India or Afghanistan. After 9/11, Saudi Arabia gradually came to this realization and is making some progress in its domestic struggle with Al-Qaeda. I hope Pakistan will do likewise. U.S. policy clearly will require more accountability from Pakistan in its military operations on its side of the Afghan-Pakistan border, and certainly regarding what it does with U.S. financial and military assistance. I expect, and I'll be pushing for, greater U.S. efforts to promote more Pakistani counterinsurgency capability instead of the U.S. as enabler of more capability to deal with India. The interconnectedness of the terrorist world was made clear in Mumbai. The terrorist motives reflect the ideological flow of extremist ideas between the Middle East and South Asia. This interconnectedness was symbolized by the purposeful attack on the Chabad house, tucked away on a small street and ideologically about as far as one could conceivably get from the national struggles between Pakistan and India. And as to the Middle East itself, our primary goals will not change much, though our methods and our approach probably will. We will seek to deny Iran nuclear arms, but we will likely do so in part through dialogue. We will continue the focus on Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts that this administration began with in Annapolis. We will continue to support moderate Arab leaders, such as Mahmoud Abbas and Salam Fayyad. We will likely continue to pursue political liberalization in the Arab world, but I think with less fanfare and more caution than did the previous administration. As chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my overwhelming priority is Iran. Many American leaders, including President-elect Obama, have called the prospect that Iran will develop or acquire nuclear arms unacceptable. The President-elect, in fact, has said he will not allow this to happen. That's the right perspective, but we will have to move at warp speed if we're going to succeed at preventing Iran from going nuclear. Because our current approach is on a trajectory to failure in this regard, the U.S., with or without its partners, I think needs to have an engagement strategy with Iran in a dialogue. But it's a dialogue of a very limited duration, say 8 to 12 weeks, unless Iran complies with the demand of the international community that it suspend its uranium enrichment program. And even if the dialogue fails, and it sure might well, I am no optimistic predictor of a successful conclusion, I believe that effort will have been worthwhile, for we will have significantly boosted our credibility and I believe our international support for whatever course we choose to follow next. We have no time to lose. We shouldn't wait for the Iranian elections before embarking on a new strategy. Sequencing here is very important. Prior to dialogue, the U.S., with a single-minded focus, should attempt to secure the support of its P5+1 partners for a program of crippling sanctions should the talks fail. Should that prove impossible, the U.S. has to seek to organize a joint sanctions effort coordinated with at least several of Iran's key economic partners, France, Italy, Germany, India. Throughout the duration of these sanctions efforts and of dialogue with Iran, the military option must remain on the table. The Saban Center recently produced a report that raised the prospect, both Professor Evron and Itamar talked about this, a U.S. nuclear umbrella for Israel or for the wider region. As widely understood, and one of the authors of that report is going to be speaking to us later, a U.S. declaration that an Iranian nuclear attack, what this means really is that a U.S. declaration that an Iranian nuclear attack on Israel would be met with a devastating nuclear attack on Iran by the United States. I have no idea if the Obama team is considering such a declaration, as was reported in the Israeli press last week, but this concept raises a number of questions. Would it be wise for the U.S. to make such a declaration? Would it be a credible threat and an effective deterrent? Is the mere discussion of the idea defeatist, an acknowledgement to the world that we have lost hope of preventing Iran from becoming nuclear arms capable? And what about the idea suggested, it was referenced earlier by then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, that not only Israel, but all of the U.S.'s Arab friends should be gathered under this umbrella? Would a non-nuclear umbrella provide deterrence? I'd love to see more discussion here today about the implications of such a policy. I personally would urge the Obama administration to give Iran the highest priority in almost all of its bilateral relationships. And in the case of Russia in particular, it's critical we establish a set of priorities to guide our relationships in dealing with Russia. Iran should be at the top of that list of priorities. In my view, that is far more important for U.S. national interests than the pace of missile defense emplacements in Eastern Europe or rapid expansion of NATO. As for the Congress, we're going to work closely with President Obama in developing the appropriate urgent approach to the Iranian nuclear program. And we will stand ready to provide legislative backing for the administration's efforts, whether through stricter sanctions laws, resolutions embodying statements of national policy, or incentives for Iranian good behavior. The unique partnership, that special relationship, will remain intact. I believe the assistance levels foreseen in last year's Memorandum of Understanding will be fully realized. When candidate Obama spoke of his strong commitment to make sure that the bond between the United States and Israel is unbreakable today, tomorrow, and forever, I believe he means it. At the same time, I'm quite sure he will vigorously pursue peace efforts between Israel and the Palestinians. And Israel's responsiveness to those efforts will be a factor that affect the tone and the substance of the bilateral relations. Regarding the Palestinian territories, the new administration will quite likely continue a number of the policies started by this administration. The effort to train and equip Palestinian security forces, the effort to isolate Hamas, the improvement of governance and economic conditions on the ground for the West Bank, the emphasis on dismantling unauthorized outposts, restricting the growth of settlements, and enhancing access and freedom of movement on the West Bank may well be greater than it has been under the Bush administration. I believe the new administration will also press with renewed energy wealthy Arab states to contribute far more than the meager amounts that these generally have done so far. One of the issues that's never been addressed adequately in the peace process is incitement to hatred and violence. I think we need to start with textbooks. Palestinian textbooks will reflect a Palestinian view of history, but they should not project gratuitous hatred of Israelis and Jews. I think the international community needs to support a review of the Palestinian textbooks and be willing to support the development of new ones. As for Syria, I expect the new administration to probe whether intensified diplomatic engagement with Damascus can succeed in driving a wedge deep into the Syrian-Iranian alliance and erode the Assad regime's support for Hezbollah and Hamas. And I also anticipate that the administration will explore the prospects for Israeli-Syrian peace, although this will depend very significantly on the attitude of the new Israeli government to this issue. In no sense have I attempted to provide a comprehensive review of expected foreign policy initiatives of the new administration. For example, I can't imagine an Obama administration not bringing new ideas and policies to the table on genocidal violence in Darfur, conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the despotic and cruel governance of Mugabe's Zimbabwe. Latin America will get new attention. But in pursuing our national interests and a better and safer world, there's one factor that I cannot quantify or calculate. Does the international response to Barack Obama's election, its historical nature, the excitement and goodwill that it's engendered, combining that with the president-elect's own intellect, his discipline, and his manner, and the quality of his foreign policy and national security teams, enhance in some, again, non-quantifiable, incalculable way, our ability to achieve our shared goals, a very complicated and awesome agenda that we face. The administration and all of us who have foreign policy responsibilities will face a remarkably difficult set of challenges on January 20th. With the help of our friends, we'll have to choose wisely, for the lives of our citizens and those of our friends will depend on our doing so. Thank you very much for inviting me.